So this is why is now the best time you put your money in VC now. We've got some great folks with us, Dixie Dahl, Alan, Matt, and Jim Orlando. I think we'll just go quickly down the line and do quick intros and then jump into the Dixie and start us off.
I am the founder of what used to be called Law Capital Management, is now known as DCM, and we're in a fund, and we have been in existence since 1996. I also served as the chairman of the National Venture Capital Association during the fund years of 08 and 09, in the middle of the global financial crisis. And I just want to say a few remarks on perspectives about why I think this environment is a very attractive time to be going into venture.
Great.
I'm Al Malata. I'm with Campton Private Equity Advisors. We advise a fund of fund that's based in London and is listed on the London Stock Exchange.
I'm Jim Orlando from OMERS Ventures. OMERS pension fund, $100 billion under management, based out of Toronto. I'm with the venture arm of OMERS. We're a $450 million allocation from the fund. And unlike most institutions, we invest directly in companies. We act as a GP, we're not an LP. So it's a little bit of a different perspective from the context of an institution doing direct venture.
Great. So I put together a few slides that I think this is why everyone's excited about venture these days. So these are the new numbers from Cambridge Associates. So these are the 10-year returns. You've got all VC on the left, early stage, and then you've got your Dow, NASDAQ, S&P. That's your 10 years, and that number has definitely improved in the past few years. 15 years, this one's just blew me away. If you look at early stage, it's just crazy. And then for 20, again, just completely outpacing public markets. Dixon, you want to start us off with why you think, even now, I mean, you don't want to check time the market, but I mean, right? You should be in venture, right?
Yes, I think all of us that have been in venture as long as I have. I started my career we founded the Axel Telecom Fund back in 1984. It's always been a cyclical business. You can have a debate about the length of the cycles or the periodicity, but I had, I think there was a bubble that just ended up in 1983, the disk drive bubble, the PC bubble, and then so we got started, and then it crashed, and so we got started at the bottom of the cycle then, and we had a little mini hiccup when we had the market crash in '87, and then things started getting fairly good, and the industry went on to the true bubble days of '99 and 2000, and then we've gone through a period of 12, 13 years of what I call the dark ages of VC. But people, it's always the history here is the good times to be planting seeds and starting transformative companies is when the market is really lousy, because you don't get lots of competitors and people are more efficient with the way they use capital. I'd conclude my early remark here by saying that one of my favorite experiences in the Valley over the last 10 years was all the people about, the 04, 05 time frame were saying, "Dear Lord, just give me one more bubble." And I don't want to argue that we're in a bubble environment now. I think we're just coming back to one of the times when it's really good to have a portfolio of companies that are ready to exit, because the exit environment, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my slides. The exit environment right now is about as good as it's been in 15 years, I think. You can debate that, but I will cite some data here that reinforce that.
So Alan, there has been quite a bit, just at this conference you hear a lot of, the word bubble has been used quite a bit, frothiness, overvaluation. How do you, what would you say to those folks who are really concerned about that and say, why shouldn't, somebody was saying, I think 2014 is going to be a terrible vintage. I'm like, how do you know that?
So-
What do you say to those folks?
So a couple of things. One, in our portfolio, we have a number of 99 vintage funds. And those looked pretty bad collectively for a while. But they're all looking like we're going to ultimately return over 1x capital. So even in the worst of times, if you have a diversified portfolio of venture funds, you're gonna, it's gonna do okay. Venture has a great way of rebound. From an LP perspective, a couple of thoughts. If you're thinking about establishing a venture fund investment program, I think any time is really a good time. I don't think you want to try and time the market for venture. I think that's a bad idea. The keys to a successful program, in my experience, are committing to this very long-term asset class and committing to investing continually over that long period of time. If you only invest in one vintage, you may get bit. But if you invest year over year and have a consistent program, you're going to do fine, regardless of where you start. Now, one last comment. If you start your program now, one of the nice things, because valuations are high and rising, it may actually mitigate that J curve as you get started. So that might be one benefit of getting started now.
Jim, what are some things that, I mean, for LPs who are new to this, who are new to VC, what are some things that they should be looking for if they make the commitment? What should they be looking for in a new fund or any fund?
Sure. It's I think there's a lot of dynamics, and maybe I'll answer it in the context of how OMERS
Sure.
decides to go at venture. The firm had been investing in various venture funds, sort of dating back to that 99-2000 vintages when it really got aggressive in terms of investing in funds. As things played out, obviously there was the dot-com bubble burst, and the pension fund pulled out of venture more or less. Obviously, continued with its commitments that are already made. But about 5 years ago, when the financial collapse happened, CIO and CEO felt it was a good time to get back into venture more aggressively. In parallel, our private equity group had migrated more towards doing just leveraged buyouts, so there was no venture being done in the pension fund as a whole. So 5 years ago, more aggressive decision to get into venture, and as I mentioned a moment ago, the way we do it is go at it directly, investing in companies. Started originally investing in Canadian or Canada-based startups. It's where we had our home market advantage, and in fact found that there was a supply-demand imbalance, given that there were essentially no venture in Canada, or no venture firms, or very few venture firms operating in Canada, and only very selectively U.S. venture firms coming into the country. So part of where I'm kind of going with this was a brand new team was built up at that point in time, and we ended up being a mix of individuals who came from other venture firms like myself, as well as operating executives. So, we've kind of answered it with our own money where our mouth is in terms of building a team that has sort of investment acumen. It's really built around generating deal flow, understanding sort of the dynamics of what a good deal might look like, and the aspect of negotiating the appropriate deals combined with entrepreneurs who themselves had successfully built up their own startups and sold them or IPO'd them. And that's really the constitution of the team. So at least for us, the right team makeup is individuals with both backgrounds, and it allowed us to really get involved with both early stage startups, adding value in more operating capacity, or later stage startups where it's more about understanding the growth aspects and the positioning of the company than it is about adding management teams or changing individuals out. So for us, that's our answer, is GP that would have both those sort of mixes of individuals involved.
So Dixon, I'm going to bring up a slide that you brought. I called it Dixon's Reasons for Optimism.
Yeah. Just a little bit of history on on this slide here. One of the reasons that the public markets have picked up for for venture in the last couple of years, it's not an accident. When I took over the chairmanship of the NBCA in 08-09, we had 0 IPOs, tech companies, in the second quarter. That was my first 3 months on the job. That had not happened since back in the 1970s, when our industry was just in the beginning of its existence. So I decided to do a detailed look about what some of the reasons were that we weren't having that the IPO market had just basically evaporated. So while I was doing that work, we had the global financial crisis, but put out a document that I published when I went out of office in the NBCA called the 4-Pillar Plan to Restore Liquidity. And it's widely, I think, acknowledged by a lot of people that have followed the industry now that the Jobs Act, which was signed into law, I have a couple of slides to show you on that in just a minute here. When we went down to Washington and got the Jobs Act signed at the White House, that has been a significant reason and a significant factor in the return of IPOs into the technology marketplace. And they're on track this year to certainly be the healthiest tech IPO activity since 2007. And depending on how the rest of the year plays out, it could actually be the best IPO market since the year 2000.
I'm sorry I don't have the other ones on here. I've got
Just one other one other comment here is that somebody talked about the balance returning to the market, and for the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually, in the venture industry in the U.S., we've been spending, investing more money than has been raised. And that brings the industry back into balance because we've been winnowing away the backlog of commitments. And so I think that this year, most of the forecasts that people are making is that we're going to raise somewhere between 25 and $30 billion. This probably is going to be the first year in quite a long time when we actually raise more money than we deploy. But that's the definition of the industry coming back into balance. So I just wanted to whiz through a couple of observations. This is a report published by Deloitte & Touche. You can go find it on the web if you want. It's the 2014 Global Venture Capital Confidence Survey. And it's some independent data that confirms that the people that took this survey across all these different countries feel that the U.S., Israel, and Canada, to reinforce your point, are going to be the 3 marketplaces that people are most confident about. Maybe you can hit the next one.
You know what? I only had those 2. I only had those 2 on there. Is that good?
What's that?
I only had those 2 slides from you.
Okay. All right. Okay. I had some others in there, but actually they were in the projector there. I don't want to get off track here. So those are my comments here, and I think that it feels good, and I think that innovation, our industry has gone globally in a very big way. This is a reflection of all the different perceptions of different countries where the survey was done.
So Alan, CalPERS got, a few years ago got out of VC, and now they're getting out of hedge funds. Somebody was telling me the reason they got out was because they couldn't negotiate, really good terms with the best venture funds, which I thought was kind of insane. Personally, is it worth it to be, as an LP, to be flexible on terms if you're convinced that the team is really going to knock it out of the park? What's your thinking there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, if you are investing in one of the top tier funds, you typically aren't going to have any negotiating ability on terms. You may be able to get a side letter if you have some specific things unique to your situation as an LP, but you're not going to be able to negotiate the fundamental terms of any of these top managers. So the bottom line is, if it's got a 30% carry provision in there, you're going to have to accept it. Now, in our experience, we have invested in funds that have 30% carry provisions, and they've done quite well. So it really goes back to the manager selection, really understanding their strategy, their team, how they're going to be successful, and you just have to decide, do those terms, can we be flexible and live with those terms? If you can't, then you just don't invest.
I think it goes without saying, but I've been in this industry a long time, and I think that the most sophisticated, one of the partners that have made commitments to venture over the years are not that sensitive toward the terms. They will. I mean, some of our lead fund of funds always used to tell us, and they told all my partners for many years that they want to pay the market rate, and the net returns are all that matter to them. And they found that getting into the best funds and not haggling or hassling over the terms has always been the secret to outperformance by the best limited partners and fund of funds.
Jim, what are your thoughts? I mean, it seems like you could, as an LP, that you could really overthink this, and maybe it's just sort of keep it simple, pick a really great team.
Yeah, I guess I'm of the belief that if you have a slot with one of those top performing managers that charges 30% carry, you should keep it. In general, you can't get very large slots anyway, so depending on your sort of capital allocation and whatnot, I think Dixon had it on his earlier slide, the flight to quality. Absolutely keep it. These successful managers just keep generating the returns. Part of kind of back to how we've gone at things, we didn't really have the luxury of having any real access to the top performing managers. So instead sort of decided to go in a totally different direction, which was in the direct investment. Certainly there's better net to the LP terms, or in this case net to OMERS, because it's a captive fund. Obviously you sort of make the next question of, well, do you really get access to the best deals? And much of this really is around trying to cherry pick the right deals, and in many cases riding off the coattails of some of those earlier stage investments made by some of the the 30% carry kind of individuals, and trying to leverage whatever capabilities we have in terms of being a very large institution, well capitalized, ability to invest over the long term, ability to carry a company into the public markets and things like that.
So we've got
I'd really, I'm a fan of a lot of these earlier stage investors.
One second, I do want to let people know, I want this to be interactive, so if you have questions, please raise your hand during the discussion and we'll get them in. Go ahead, Dixon.
Just going to say one more thing. One of the realities of venture right now today is that angels have become a very big factor in the equation. But what's not as widely known is that the companies that are started by angels, only 1 out of 3 of those is able to raise an institutional round. So there's going to be some broken glass, from the results of the angels.
Actually, the entrepreneurs call that the Series A crunch. They actually have to work for it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I actually would be surprised if it's the numbers are worse than what you said.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's
2 out of 3 don't think.
Yeah.
No, okay. No argument. Yeah.
any questions? So I do want to ask about, so there's quite a few debut funds, and there's also a number of these, Charlie O'Donnell was here yesterday, these solo GP funds. Is that something that LPs should look at? Is it way, I guess, depending on their allocation, is it way too small for them to bother with, or is it an opportunity for them to get some exposure to, say, a potentially great manager who, like 5 years from now, is going to do something really big?
Yeah, I think in terms of pretty much emerging managers, I think there are some great opportunities for emerging managers. These are funds that are first-time funds, individuals, entrepreneurs who are starting a fund. great example of this is Andreessen Horowitz, two entrepreneurs, very successful, and they've really built something special in a pretty short period of time. So I think, you know, if you are very good in your diligence, that there can be some really good opportunities for emerging managers.
What do you look for there? I mean, you had Spark, you had Union Square, you had Foundry. This was like around 2.
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article in the Venture Capital Journal several years ago. It's called An LP's Guide to Emerging Managers. And I pointed to a number of things that we look to there. And, you know, clearly it's the team, it's their strategy, it's their access to deal flow. Really, that access to deal flow is really critical. You have to be confident that they're going to be able to be in the best deals, especially in this hyper-competitive environment. But I also like to see skin in the game. I think that's important, that the GP puts a meaningful amount of their own net worth into the fund. But once you kind of really do a lot of diligence, you can become pretty comfortable.
So Jim, are there, I mean, for LPs who are looking at this, what are some red flags that they should be looking for as they're diligencing these funds?
Yeah, certainly, for sure. You know, I think always a big part of it is just sort of team makeup and what is the dynamic and chemistry there. There have been a few discussions through the course of these sessions where people talking about individuals who are not so involved yet still have their, still part of the investment team, or other firms who just make a transition from different generations of leaders to partners who are more active. So, you know, I'm really a fan of making sure that those who invest, those who do the investments invest, you know, alongside, and likewise are the ones that are actively involved in terms of the business itself and the investments. So I look for that whole dynamic around what's going on with the team.
Oh, we got a question. Here we go.
A quick question for Alan. Alan, do you see sometimes opportunities to invest in, say, an SPV or a sidecar fund to put more capital beyond, you know, what one of your fund managers?
People do it, we don't.
Right.
People do that as a way to be able, typically to be able to access co-investments. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's pretty common. We just don't do that. We don't do that.
Dixon, what are some red flags that LP should be aware of? I mean, you would know.
Well, I think the team is far and away, the older I get, the more important the team becomes. And so I think that any LP who's looking at going into venture for the first time, or maybe returning after a period of dry spell, like you just referred to, and focus on the team and who's look back at the performance attribution, you know, record, like who's actually putting the points on the board, you know, inside the firm, and make sure that those people are still active in the business. There's been an awful lot of generational transitions that have happened in the venture industry, you know, since I joined it, and you know, some firms handle it a whole lot better than others. I think we've done a pretty good job of that in DCM as our emphasis on China has increased. We've beefed up our resources there, and we've had some really huge home runs that we would never have been able to to do if we had not actually gone into the Chinese market and hired a bunch of GPs that are Chinese locals and that really know that ecosystem. And so, but you know, there were a lot of other firms that when the China boom began, like around 1999, I think the first deal we did there, we discovered at a women's entrepreneur forum in Berkeley, and there was not any venture capital in China at that time, and so we found a really good team at that women entrepreneurs thing. We backed the company, and for about a year and a half, my partners attended board meetings by flying back and forth across the Pacific. So, it's all these all these points of differentiation. So we were fortunate enough, we made a conscious decision to really go and emphasize China because of all the factors that are widely discussed, and that one has paid off in spades for our LPs, and so I think look at the strategy and find something that you think is differentiated about that, and then check the team and be sure that the team is going to be able to go out and execute and deliver on that strategy. Those would be my.
Larry, let me just add to that. So, mistakes made. Where I've made mistakes as a LP investing in funds, primarily related to team. And one of the mistakes was where one of the members of the GP just had too much ownership, too much of the economics, and was difficult to get along with. So people left, and you had a lot of turnover in the team, and it's very hard to have continuity or ultimately, I think, to be successful as a GP if you can have that kind of turnover and turmoil within the team.
That's a really, I was just thinking anecdotally, I can think of a few firms that have blown up. But what's interesting, and there's a couple that I'm thinking of, I probably shouldn't name them, but where there was basically a mass exodus, it got really ugly there for a while. But what was interesting is that so you would think that the LPs would be upset. Over the life of the fund, the fund actually did okay. So they did enough good deals to sustain. So, I mean, even though I hear what you're saying, I don't know that I would be completely terrified of that, but.
Well, it depends on where they are in their cycle.
Yeah.
So, if you have a mass exodus of key investment personnel right after the fund is closed, and this actually happened. Fortunately, it was a fund we did not invest in. But the LPs exercised the no fault divorce and shut the fund down.
We've got just a couple minutes left. You got a question?
So we've had changes in labor inputs since 2008. We've had changes in capital inputs, and we've had changes in technology inputs in terms of access to the cloud, access to cheap I/O. Could all of these things together be signaling kind of the beginning of a paradigm shift in terms of how these companies are built and the returns that we get? And right now, we're only starting to see the initial data points from all those changes in inputs.
I think it's a fancy way of saying it. Is this the beginning of something really, really big?
I just think that innovation has never been more vibrant. Now it's become a global phenomenon. In Silicon Valley, the last year and a half, one of the biggest changes that's happened is that there are. I run into these kinds of organizations all the time. I mean, countries from all around the world want to come out and bring a delegation to Silicon Valley and learn all about it so that they can go back and create a miniature Silicon Valley. And kind of the first one that I ran into that was trying to do that was Russia. And the Silicon Valley Bank opened more new bank accounts last year than ever in its history, and the vast majority of these were corporations coming to Silicon Valley to start venture funds and and give them access to the innovation and the technology that's associated with the valley. So I don't think that as Jim Breyer said yesterday, some of these trends like the cloud and so on and so forth mean that you can start innovative companies that can really grow and be big now for maybe 1/5 the capital of what would have been required 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that trend is likely to continue. And another thing that's happening coincidentally is that the center of Silicon Valley itself has actually shifted in the last couple of years from, I think the center of gravity used to be around Palo Alto. There's a lot of activity to the south of there and down to San Jose for the storage companies and semiconductor companies. But now with the cloud, the critical mass center for cloud companies is now in the south of Market in San Francisco. And also there's a very significant presence associated with social networking companies, including Twitter, that are in that part of the city as well. So those are some changes. These corporate initiatives, though, are having an inflationary an inflationary effect on valuations, and it's not at all clear, whether these corporations are going to really be able to achieve the objectives that they are really trying to set out to achieve. You can't just wake up one morning in a corporation and say we want to go and set up a presence in Silicon Valley. Being on the board of DirecTV, which I'm still a part of the board and probably will be until the merger goes through, if it does. This was a company that kind of didn't have anything at all going in Silicon Valley when I joined it, and so I spent some time to help the company meet a bunch of companies in the valley, especially ones that could have an ancillary effect or supporting effect on the strategy of DirecTV. And so a lot of other companies are trying to varying degrees of success to do that.
We ran out of time, unfortunately, so please join me in thanking Dixon, Alan, and Jim for their time today.